Welcome to Two Bees in a Pod, brought to you by the Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory at the University of Florida's Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. It is our goal to advance understanding of honeybees and beekeeping, grow the beekeeping community, and improve the health of honeybees everywhere. In this podcast, you'll hear research updates, beekeeping myths debunked, and advice on beekeeping from our resident experts, beekeepers, scientists, and other program guests. Join us for today's program, and thank you for listening to Two Bees in a Pod. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Two Bees in a Pod. I'm your host, Jamie Ellis, accompanied by co-host Amy Vu.
Hello.
Today's episode we think is an exciting one. We're going to be talking about the history of the Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory here at the University of Florida. We plan to give an in-depth view of the instruction programs that we offer at UF. And we are going to discuss honeybee colony health. What does it mean to have a healthy honeybee colony? How do we know that we have arrived there? We will end this episode, as we always end episodes, with questions that we try to answer from viewers or listeners to our podcast. All right, so let's get going.
All right. So, Jamie, I'm always giving tours. We have public tours all the time here. And the first thing we do is we talk about the history of the lab and how this was built, how this facility was built. And, it was just built last year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the new bee lab that we're sitting in right now while we do this podcast was actually opened in June of 2018. And so the story behind how it got there in the first place is actually a pretty good story. And we owe a lot to beekeepers for making this happen.
Beekeepers throughout the state.
Yeah, well, let me give just a brief overview of the background. Essentially, 6 or so years ago, a couple beekeepers visited me, Lawrence Cutts and Gordon Klaus, and they were talking to me about raising money for research equipment to support the research programs that we have here at the University of Florida. And I thought that was a good idea, but at the time, the lab space that I was in Steinmetz Hall was small, and I kind of told them, I was like, look, guys, you can buy me more equipment, but what I really need is more space. And I kind of said that tongue-in-cheek, thinking that wouldn't really catch on. Well, knowing Lawrence and Gordon now, I should have known better, because that really caught on. And they took that to the Florida State Beekeepers Association. And the idea of building a new bee lab on the University of Florida campus just absolutely exploded. So it started just with a conversation and became a grassroots effort to build what we think is a premier honeybee research and extension facility.
And that's pretty cool. I mean, it was just one of those things where the need was there.
Yeah, it was. The story is, I was hired at the University of Florida in 2006, right? And when I was hired, I had a very big extension appointment. So most of my job was to interact with beekeepers for educational purposes. So I really... I always joke I was given a relatively small lab in the entomology department, because the idea is I wouldn't have to do much research. I was going to spend a lot of time with beekeepers. But our research program just grew. And so by the time I was having that conversation with Mr. Cutts and Mr. Klaus, I already had somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 people in the lab, postdocs, technicians, students, et cetera. We had a lot of research projects. Our extension program was going. Our instructional program was growing as well. And we just needed space. And so the need was there. And the beekeepers identified it, and they just really gravitated towards this idea of building a new lab.
Sure. So what did they do after that? How did you get in the process of building this lab and getting it approved, things like that?
Well, I mean, obviously the catch with building a lab like the one that we're sitting in at the moment is these things aren't free. So to start you sort of from the beginning, we had some early dialogue with IFAS facilities. So IFAS is the branch of the university the Department of Entomology and Nematology is housed in, and we met with Kevin Heineke here, who's the lead of IFAS facilities. And the idea was we wanted to go to Kevin and say, Kevin, this is kind of the vision that we have for a bee lab. We know that you've managed other building projects on behalf of the University of Florida. So could you work with us to roughly design a building so we can get an idea of the cost of the facility? So we were able to put together a rough schematic, a diagram of the building. We knew about what the square footage would be, around 10,000 square feet. And he told us it would cost about $350 a square feet. So we were looking at something around 10,000 square feet that would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. Well, where do we get that money, right? And so the beekeepers quickly thought that perhaps they could go to the state and see if the state legislator and the governor could allocate money for that. And that's really where the process started.
All right. And it happened the first time around?
Well, it's politics. Nothing is easy in politics. So what happened is the Florida State Beekeepers Association paid for an independent third-party review of what would the bee lab bring to the state in revenue, because that's what politicians were already asking for. What's going to be the return on the investment? If we build this bee lab, what's the state going to get out of it? What are beekeepers going to get out of it? And so what they did is they paid for this third-party review that suggested if the bee lab were built over the lifetime of the facility, there would be a return on investment of about $90 million. Well, that figure then was taken by the Florida State Beekeepers Association to the state legislator, who the first year allocated $2.5 million. Wow. Now, if you're following the story, right, this is a 10,000 square feet facility for $3.5 million. But we were happy to get anything. So that passed the Florida House and the Senate, made it up to the governor's office, and it got a big whopping veto the first year. It was demoralizing.
Womp womp.
Exactly. Yeah, like whack-a-mole, right? I felt like we were the moles that got whacked in that game. But you know, beekeepers, they don't really stop when they put their mind on something. So they did it again. They rearmed themselves, recalibrated their argument, went back to the legislator the next year, were allocated $2.5 million again. We knew it was going to sail through, but the second year we got whack-a-mole again. So, you know, they always say in politics, third time's a charm. I was on sabbatical in Germany at the time, and I'd kind of given up, but the beekeepers had said, you know, we'll just try one more time. We'll see what happens. They had a state legislator down in Umatilla, Florida, who was really advocating for it, Senator Alan Hayes, and he said, let's do this one more time. I think I can get it through. And so that year, the beekeepers managed to get $2 million allocated from the state, as long as the University of Florida put in $500,000 and the beekeepers raised $200,000. So it's kind of this matching deal. Mm-hmm. So we crossed our fingers, held our breath while that made it to the governor's desk, and he didn't veto it. So it made it through. But if you're doing a little bit of math, state gave $2 million, University of Florida was on the hook for $500,000, and the beekeepers had to raise $200,000. That's still only $2.7 million of a building that 3 years earlier we had guessed would cost $3.5 million. Mm-hmm. So we were short on money.
And then what happened?
Well, I knew you'd want to know. I was waiting for you to ask that very question. So then the beekeepers, through the Florida State Beekeepers Association, said, we're going to make this happen. The very first day that the money could be drawn down from the state, a commercial beekeeper, David Mendez, donated $200,000 towards the effort. And right off the bat, we had already met our match. However, that's not $3.5 million. So the Florida State Beekeepers Association put together a fundraising committee who just went berserk. They went out there and beat the bushes, and we had hobbyist beekeepers, corporations, sideline beekeepers, commercial beekeepers, individuals simply interested in bees, local bee clubs, state bee clubs donating money. And very quickly, we got above $3.5 million to build the facility. But the catch is we're 3 years later. Everything costs more.
Sure.
So the University of Florida allowed us to move forward. And essentially what we did is we designed the first building. The University of Florida said, well, we need to assume we're not going to get any more money. I want you to go ahead and put in this first building everything that you think you need. Mm-hmm. And so the first building was designed. And while the first building was designed, this 8,500 square foot facility, the beekeepers continued to fundraise. And so we were able to build a second building that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,500 square feet. And from there, we even got a teaching pavilion that's somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,000 square feet. So once you put all of it together, we have now over 16,000 square feet of space, all paid for by the state legislature, the University of Florida, and lots of beekeepers who really bought into this effort.
Yeah, I remember, during that time, I was an extension agent in Orange County, and we were working with the local beekeepers association. I just remember every single meeting, we were trying to pitch, the idea of having this state-of-the-art facility right here at the University of Florida, and it was only a couple hours away.
Amy, I was blown away. Every time I would go speak somewhere, beekeepers were it was almost like I was at a church and someone was passing the offering plate around. I mean, people were just donating. I mean, they were giving $1. They were giving cents. They were giving hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars. We even had, $500,000 donation. And it became the thing that beekeepers in Florida rallied behind. Now, this of course is not just a Florida podcast. And so, it's funny, we build this facility here, but it now makes it possible for us to reach beekeepers everywhere. I mean, this podcast is an example. We now have the ability, the infrastructure necessary to put together a resource that's now useful to beekeepers everywhere. I mean, I'm humbled, right? The beekeepers did this for us. I'm amazed at their effort. And I really think it was visionary, because I think that this facility is going to allow us to house an amazing team moving forward who can help us reach all of our instruction, extension, and research goals, and even more. And I think it's a great partnership. The University of Florida kind of touts this as a classic private-public partnership. Private individuals, the public coming together, recognizing a need, the need being bee losses, bee-related issues, and now coming together to build a bee lab that's just the beginning of something really amazing here.
Yeah, and I think that's an amazing example of just, exactly what the land grant system is here for. But just real quickly, we do have tours, so can you just tell us about, what people would see when they come here?
Yeah, of course. So, we're a land grant institution. We have responsibilities in research, teaching, and instruction. So when we designed the 16,000 plus square foot facility, that we wanted to make sure there was space for all of those things. So we've got teaching classroom, we've got a very large research lab and accompanying rooms that support the research. We have what I happen to think is the world's coolest observation hive room. We can accommodate 12 observation hives. It's red lit, it's climate controlled, it's just a perfect place to study bee behavior. We have a wonderful break room, great offices, lots of meeting space. We have a teaching apiary behind the building. We have research colonies behind the building that make it possible for us to do research here. We even have a support facility, the Amy E. Lohman Apiculture Center, which is composed of a state-of-the-art honey extraction and processing facility, a beekeeping museum, some office space, and even a beekeeping workshop. We even have the Gordon Klaus teaching pavilion out back where we can accommodate 150 beekeepers. And if that weren't enough, the entire bee campus, as it were, is landscaped in pollinator gardens that of course attract pollinators, and in the backyard attract honeybees specifically. And if that wasn't even enough, we happen to be by Steinmetz Hall, which is home of the University of Florida Entomology and Nematology Department, which is currently ranked the #1 entomology and nematology department on planet Earth. So we have this, and we have our colleagues at the USDA just east of us half a mile, and our colleagues at the Florida Department of Ag just west of us half a mile. We just have great colleagues, great resources, great campus, and it's exciting. You come on a tour here and you really feel like you're in the center of entomological science.
And that's great. And there we have it, folks. That's the history of the lab. I think it's a pretty cool story.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to the beekeepers, and I can't wait to see what kind of comes out of this effort.
For more information about this podcast, check out our website at ufhoneybee.com.
The University of Florida, where we are recording this podcast, is a land-grant institution. That means we have responsibilities in research, extension, and instruction. And we're going to take the next few podcasts to introduce you to these three branches of the land-grant institution. So we have here with us our apiculture lecturer extraordinaire, Cameron Jack, who's joining us to talk about instruction here at the University of Florida. Hello, Cameron.
Hello. Glad to be here.
And as an introduction to this segment, I just want to say, research, the purpose of research is to, take a problem for which there currently is no answer, to do an experiment, and to determine the answer for that. The purpose of extension, right, is to carry information to the masses and to get those masses to change behavior and hopefully ultimately lead to some sort of environmental or social change. So Cameron, what is instruction if it's not just simply teaching students? What are we actually trying to do with those students?
Yeah, and I think maybe the more traditional thought of teaching is just you're giving these students just a ton of knowledge. You're just throwing information at them, and that's not necessarily what our goal is. Teaching instruction, I mean, we want to give them knowledge. We want to give them the tools to be successful, but ultimately we want them to be proficient in whatever we're talking about, or whatever the subject matter is, right? So if we're talking beekeeping, we're hoping that people don't just learn kind of the warm and fuzzies of what beekeeping is. We want them to actually go out and be successful at beekeeping.
I love that idea of proficient. We're not just teaching for you to tick a box. Like, it's your responsibility to teach at the University of Florida. You're not just trying to tick a box. I've taught a class. I've done it. Students aren't just trying to tick a box. I've taken 3 credit hours. I've needed these 3 credit hours in this gen ed course or whatever. You are really wanting them to change. You are wanting them to have the tools necessary to succeed. And of course, if they choose genetics or nursing or something else, you want something that they've picked up in your class to carry over into that profession. I like that idea.
Exactly. I mean, I'm also not maybe naive enough to expect that we're going to have just a huge army of beekeepers that are going to come out of this program and go into the industry and all be commercial beekeepers. That's not really what the thought is, because most of them are going to be in different majors.
Sure.
I mean, they're not necessarily even in entomology. In fact, throughout most of the courses, most of them are not in entomology.
We welcome even English majors.
Even English? Oh, the
and
humanities.
the occasional art student.
Yes, exactly. But we have just a wide range of students coming from all sorts of areas, and but hopefully they are learning some specific techniques, even if it's just like learning how to read a paper, a scientific paper, and be able to digest it and find maybe some of the flaws or whatever it is, to be able to apply that. And that can be useful for really any major, any education.
Yeah, so do you want to talk to us about some of the classes that you're offering? Yeah,
definitely. So right now, I've been here for a year and a half. When I got here, we had just a course called beekeeping, which really covered just about every topic in beekeeping, just loosely. And then we had a practical beekeeping class, which was a hands-on version. So you can actually, the students, you build the equipment, you give them the bees, and they get the hands-on learning experience. Since we've been here, I've tried to develop a few more courses. We've kind of taken the original beekeeping class and split it into 2 parts because, to try to cram a whole agricultural commodity into one single course just means that we were just scratching the surface.
Not just a whole agriculture commodity, the most important agriculture commodity that exists.
Exactly. And so we have a beekeeping 1 class, a beekeeping 2 class. They're both taught online. So they are accessible to students from really around the world.
So that means our listeners can even take these courses.
You can definitely take this course, and I will be happy to be your professor.
All right, well, that's good. So you've got a Beekeeping 1 course, a Beekeeping 2 course, a practical beekeeping course. What else currently exists?
Right now we have another course that's an in-person course that is really actually quite unique. It's a what we call we label it as a CURE course. So CURE, course-based undergraduate research experience. So this course is actually not necessarily about honeybees and beekeeping. It's really about how to conduct research and how to do science. And we use honeybees as a model and answer honeybee health related questions as a class, but it's kind of its own unique thing that's kind of a little bit out of the realm of beekeeping, but is also it's been a really rewarding experience.
So you've talked about 4 courses that currently exist, but you've got another one I know in development and some additional ones after that. So you can tell us what's around the corner.
Yep. This summer 2020, we are going to go. I've developed a couple of study abroad courses. So we'll be going to Thailand. We'll have one course that's about the honeybees of Asia. That'll be about the different species of honeybees. The other course is called Beekeeping in Asia, and it is kind of the differences between the management styles and of what's done in the United States versus in Asia.
So let me get this straight. Students here at the University of Florida can travel with you to Thailand and get 2 courses, one beekeeping in Asia, and the other something about honeybee species, right? The ones that are there in Thailand. And they can spend weeks in Thailand with you learning everything there is to know about beekeeping and bee species there.
It's going to be going to be a beautiful thing.
That's
Wait,
amazing.
Cameron, does that mean the students get to watch you like climb trees and like go into the forest
With
and
certainty.
like pull?
Definitely.
With certainty.
Yes.
But that's okay. So 4 exist, 2 more on the horizon, right? The two in Asia. So what else?
We have planning a honeybee biology course, which will really get into all the nitty gritty of the fascinating world of honeybees. It's going to be really interesting. And we're also planning on making a commercial beekeeping course, something that is really much more practical about how to run a business. I mean, and not just about all the beekeeping and the biology. Those kind of serve as the foundation for this course. Like, I admit, I'll be the first one to tell you, I'm not a commercial beekeeper. I don't know everything about commercial beekeeping. What I'm really hoping to do is to partner with commercial beekeepers and have them come in as guest lecturers and teach a course like that. And I would like to develop that as an online course as well, so it's available for more students.
Yeah, I think that's great. The idea of using commercial beekeepers who've been there, done that as your instructors. And so on top of that, have there been rumors of a commercial beekeeping internship where students can, carry on still?
Yeah, that's what I would really kind of consider as that kind of capstone piece would be an internship. I mean, that's kind of how it works in other agricultural education settings, right? You do a number of courses, then you do an internship, and then you go into that industry. Well, that's what I would want to do for beekeeping is help students pair up with commercial beekeepers around the country, or really around the world, wherever they're located, and so they can actually get that hands-on experience.
So folks, obviously we know a mess load about the courses here taught at the University of Florida, but lots of other institutions offer beekeeping related courses taught by a number of great faculty members. So you could always check your local area to see if there are courses that you can take. But circling the wagons back here to the University of Florida, you use the word student a lot, right? So you talked about what instruction is. You're talking now about the courses that we offer here at the University of Florida. I mentioned that similar courses may exist elsewhere, perhaps not the volume of courses, but certainly similar courses. What is a student? What types of students show up at universities?
All different types of students will show up. I mean, it's
all of the
yeah.
above.
I was like, yeah. After I asked that question, I listened to myself. I said, yeah, of course, there's lots of people.
But it's been really interesting. Like kind of we joked at the beginning. I mean, they're coming from all sorts of majors and all sorts of backgrounds. They're not necessarily young college students. I mean, we have retired folks that are coming in and still taking some of these online and in-person courses. Yep. And so I welcome that. I love that, because we'll have 1 or 2 retired folks that have been beekeeping for a number of years, and they're able to kind of answer more questions or work with students in a different way that I might be able to when I'm trying to manage a whole classroom. So a student is somebody who's wanting to learn a particular skill. And so it can be really anybody.
And there's kind of two types, right? There's undergraduate and graduate students, right? Undergraduate students are ones who are typically pursuing an undergraduate degree, so an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree. Those usually come with majors, in our case entomology, but dairy science, all kinds of other things. And so when many people think about college students, that's really what they're thinking about. They're thinking about their undergraduate degree, where people are just sitting in classes and labs. And of course, your programming and other similar programs around the country cater to undergraduates. But in the bee world, there's also a great need for graduate students. And graduate students are those individuals who are trying to get advanced degrees. In our world, that's the master's degree, which usually takes 2 to 3 years, and or a PhD, which is somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 5 years. And these are advanced degrees. There are courses that graduate students have to take that tend to be advanced courses, graduate-related courses. In our field, that might be insect physiology, it might be advanced beekeeping, things like that. But in addition to doing coursework, they're also doing research projects, and they are asking questions that they are trying to answer experimentally. And by the time they're done here, they've got masters or PhDs and are able to go on and have industry jobs or be scientists themselves.
And in addition to undergraduate students and graduate students, there's also got another kind of branch of students that's really common at the University of Florida, and that's certificate students. Yeah. So those are students that are taking a certain number of courses. Generally speaking, that's about 5 courses that will still allow you to walk away with a degree, with a piece of paper that says you've completed this and you've received this kind of training. And so that's actually something that is on the horizon as well. We want to take these different courses that we're developing and develop a beekeeping certificate program. So beekeepers really from around the world will be able to take some of these, at least the online versions of these courses, and be able to get some additional training. Like I said, I know there's a big argument that might be that, well, what can you really learn from an online course if you're not getting the hands-on bit? But what we at least hope to do is provide that foundation work, and then that's where the internship kind of comes in. Then you get those hands-on experiences after you've already built a foundation on the kind of the theory and the biology.
So beekeepers out there, I want you to hear essentially what Cameron just said. His certificate program is essentially exportable outside the University of Florida. You don't have to come here and get a degree. Instead, you can get a certificate in beekeeping and take the courses that Cameron's developed. And think about it this way. A lot of our pest control industries in the state of Florida have pest control employees who they hope to be trained through university courses they'll pay for their certificate program. Well, this is pretty similar in structure. And of course, it doesn't substitute for the hands-on that they would get by actually working with beekeepers, but it certainly provides foundational, fundamental knowledge to bees and beekeeping that would be of great value, really, to anyone working bees.
Now, Cameron, when you're talking about the certificate program, are the people that are going to be signing up for this, do they have to be enrolled as a student?
No, not necessarily. What they'll need to do, they will be a UF student, but they don't have to do an undergraduate certificate program. You just have to show a high school diploma or GED. You don't have to go through all the hoops. Mm-hmm. And even if for the graduate certificate program, you wouldn't necessarily need to do the GRE or the graduate record exam, or maybe some of those other qualifiers that you would need. It's really meant to come in, get training, and it's available for more students.
Well, I love this. Cameron, thank you so much for joining us. It really makes me want to be young again and to be a student again, all these courses that you're offering here at the university. I appreciate that. And for more information, if you're listening for more information, you can look at our podcast notes and see the courses that Cameron offers and links to some of the things that he's doing. It's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for letting me be here. For additional resources, visit the podcast page on our website, ufhoneybee.com.
Welcome back. We are going to talk a little bit about honeybee colony health in this segment. I keep seeing it, I keep reading it, I keep hearing about honeybee colony health, and the one thing that beekeepers do when they see each other, hey, how are your colonies? So Jamie, do you want to talk to me about honeybee colony health and what that actually means?
Yeah, Amy, I think this is an incredibly important topic. And it's funny because if you were to ask Jamie 20 years ago, what do you think a healthy colony is? I'd be able to give it to you just really quickly. But these days, I have come to appreciate how complicated of a topic that is. And so in this segment, I think by the time we get to the end of it, beekeepers, our listeners are going to say, yeah, this is complex. I've not thought about it from that perspective. So let me just frame it this way. In 2006 is when we started seeing what a lot of beekeepers considered elevated colony losses. That produced what we called colony collapse disorder at the time, and that morphed further into what we now call colony losses. That event led to a lot of scientific meetings that I and others attended. And what's funny is that a lot of these meetings, we talk about things that are killing colonies, varroa, nosema, nutrition stresses, queen issues, all of these things. And then we'd pause to say, okay, but if a colony doesn't have varroa, how should it look? And what we discovered is that we were struggling trying to understand the way a colony should look. What is a healthy colony? What actually are beekeepers managing towards? We talk about management. Well, management's not directionless. You're not just keeping things alive. You're trying to manage towards a goal. So we struggled with that concept. And I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I was at a meeting where this was such a hot topic that some colleagues were going to put together a manuscript that defines this is a healthy colony. This is what scientists are measuring towards in our research. This is what beekeepers should be managing towards. And it was complex.
Yeah, so it's basically not my colony's about to die.
Yeah, I want you to think about it from a very practical perspective. Take a random colony from some apiary in the United States. That colony is nearly guaranteed to have varroa. Mm-hmm. All right. So in my mind, I'm healthy because I don't have the flu and I don't have a cold and I don't have sinus issues right now and everything's working, right? Well, colonies always have Varroa. So by default, are colonies always not healthy? You know, most colonies have nosema, at least many of them do. Most colonies have deformed wing virus. If you're in the southern U.S. and parts of the world, most colonies have small hive beetles. So, you know, this is a sad way to state it, but I almost feel as if most colonies are sitting on this seesaw, teetering towards not being healthy, and our management is saving them from death. I know that's a scary way to think about it, but think about it. If we don't put management inputs to colonies, whatever diseases or pests or nutritional stresses, et cetera, that they are carrying will win. Mm-hmm. So I almost feel like all colonies are teetering on being not healthy if it were not for our management intervention. So that's kind of a scary thought if you think about it. Yeah. Failure to address colony needs mean that our colonies are going to suffer.
Mm-hmm. And it's scary because we don't really know what that threshold is, right? I mean, with all those factors combined together. But, you know, when you're talking to a beekeeper, let's say someone asks you about colony health, what would you say as far as, you know, when you're looking at the outside? A lot of people say, when I'm looking at the outside of a hive, I just look to see if the bees are coming in and out, and that's good enough for me.
Well, I'm going to start even a step earlier. I mean, I'm going to tell you that every beekeeper should start with at least 3 colonies, because to me, defining colony health starts with being able to make comparisons. Mm-hmm. If you have one colony, you can really never know if your colony's healthy. So by the time this conversation's over, we're going to say that health means that our bees are growing, are appropriate. You know, they're doing what they should do that time of year, and they're productive. All right. Well, how can you know what normal is if you don't have other colonies to which you can compare a given colony? So from the outside in, let's say I'm a hobbyist, I need at least 3 colonies. If I'm a commercial beekeeper and have thousands, this is really kind of a non-issue. But from the outside moving in, is colony A foraging the same way, at the same rate, and for the same thing that colonies B, C, D, and so on are foraging? If there's a bee beard on colonies 1, 5, and 6, is there a bee beard on colony 2? You know, if there are small piles of dead bees on the outside of colony 6, are there small piles of dead bees on the outside? In other words, what I'm seeing for this colony at this time of year under these conditions consistent with what I'm seeing at colonies that are neighboring it? And so from the outside, that's what I want to see, if my colonies are foraging similarly. If they are they collecting the same things? How do you know? Well, you can see pollen as an example. So is a colony doing what other colonies are doing that time of year?
Sure. And when you talk about pollen coming in, you know, does that necessarily mean that nectar is also coming in?
Absolutely not. You know, there can be a lot of pollen plants available in the absence of nectar at that time of year. So you will see a lot of bees collecting pollen certain times. We call it nectar-limited pollen flows. There's also pollen-limited nectar flows, which is the other way around. But just because they're bringing in pollen doesn't mean they have all the carbohydrates they need to survive.
Sure. So, I mean, they need those carbohydrates. They're also feeding, you know, they're eating, they're feeding their brood, they're feeding their little babies. So when you're looking inside a hive in the colony, what are you actually looking for?
Again, think comparison, right? So I'm inside this colony, or I've opened this hive, I'm looking at this colony. Is this colony similar to the colonies I've just worked? Is the population similar? Do I see evidence of disease? Do I see Varroa? Do I see deformed wings? If I see that, I instantly know the colony's not healthy. It can't be, because it's got the world's #1 biological threat working on it. Do I see pollen stores in this colony consistent with pollen stores that I saw in other colonies? Do I see honey resources in this colony that I see consistent? Is it free of visible signs of disease? Do I see chalk brood, et cetera? Now here's a kicker. What if all colonies are equally diseased, and you're saying this colony looks normal because it looks like other colonies? Well, that by itself's not safe. So really, beekeepers need to know what colonies should be doing given the resources available in the environment, given the time of year.
Sure, and this depends on the location of where you are throughout the world.
Absolutely.
Really.
I mean, think about it. If you're in Florida in fall, I'd expect to see a little bit of pollen coming in and maybe queens starting to slow down a little bit. But if I'm in New York in fall, I'm expecting queens to be completely shut down and colonies to be clustering. If I'm in New Hampshire in April, I would expect colonies to be growing. So that's the struggle with the healthy colony concept, is because you're not managing 40,000 bees, and that's where you want to be. You're not managing 20 frames of honey, and that's where you want to be. You're not managing the complete absence of varroa. You're managing what you consider to be an ideal for the standard colony, assuming no problems that time of year. It's a little tricky.
Yeah. So what sort of stressors would you say, or what, different sort of factors would you say come into play?
Well, you're going to hear this throughout the life of this podcast, right? And the thing that beekeepers identify, we see this a lot as evidence through the Bee Informed Partnership surveys that we read. You're going to see beekeepers identifying common stressors, varroa. If we only made a podcast about varroa, we would have enough to talk about. That is a principal biological killer of honeybees. Varroa and the pathogens they carry, most notably deformed wing virus. If beekeepers aren't managing their varroa, their bees are going to die. So what else do beekeepers say? Well, they say nutrition, so carbohydrate management, right, and pollen management. And they also say queen quality issues. Is my colony being led by a queen who's producing robust amounts of workers, and are those workers doing what they're supposed to do? And then there's some kind of second-tier stressors, nosema, perhaps small hive beetle, the foul broods, pesticides, things like that. But really those big three, nutrition, varroa, and queen issues, are the things that beekeepers have to worry about. Managing those, assuming all else being equal, managing those three things is a step towards tilting those colonies back in favor of being healthy rather than being on the brink of significant stress and perhaps even a crash.
Yeah, and that's kind of the beauty of this podcast, right? So we're going to be able to bring in researchers, different specialists on these stressors, and these people are just working full time on just the smallest factors within, a bigger picture, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would tell listeners. Listeners, this is the second episode. Don't give up on us. We are going to go into so much detail on these stressors and even more, and management-related issues and even more. But before we get too far away from what is a healthy colony, I want to illustrate how difficult it is to come up with a definition. I want to invite, Amy, our listeners to go to our Facebook page at UF Honeybee Lab, and I want you, listeners, to just jot us a note in its purest, simplest form. How do you define a healthy honeybee colony? We'd love to hear from you, and we get some comments back from you. We'll read some on the air, especially the ones we like, and that might help us shape how we think colonies are healthy. And in the future, we'll be bringing in some commercial beekeepers to discuss this very topic with, so you can see how they define healthy honeybee colonies.
And there we have it. We don't have a defined definition.
But we'll get there.
But we will get there. And now it's time for our question and answer. I've got 3 Qs. Jamie, you've got 3 As?
Well, I will have some sort of answer.
All right.
I don't know if I've got the answer, but I'll definitely take a shot at it.
You just make stuff up.
Or edit in the truth later. That's the beauty of podcasts.
So all of our questions have come from our social media, primarily Facebook. So if you do have questions, don't forget to go ahead and comment on any of our posts, and we'll pull it in to our podcast. And so we'll just go ahead and let me ask you about ants.
Yeah, what about them?
Do you like them?
I love ants. I'm an entomologist, though, right? So you've got to be careful who you ask that question. Yeah, we get questions about ants all the time. So I have a wonderful colleague who works for the University of Florida, and he is at the Fort Lauderdale Research and Education Center. His name is Dr. Bill Kern, and he knows everything about everything.
Oh, Bill, I can't wait to bring him in.
Yeah, Bill's great. We ought to have had him on the segment for this, because anytime I have ant-related questions, I always send them to Bill, because Bill is the knowledgeable ant man. So Bill wrote a fantastic document about ant control in the apiary. So just as a brief background, the University of Florida requires its specialists to write documents that we post online on given topics. And the University of Florida calls these documents EDIS documents, EDIS. That's Electronic Data Information Source. So Bill wrote an EDIS document on ant control in the apiary. And in that document, he outlines the common ants that are problems for bee colonies, lets you know that there's two kind of big breaks in the ants. There's the brood and bee eaters and the honey and nectar stealers. And the reason that's important is because both group of ants need control strategies that's unique to that group. You're not going to use a honey nectar strategy to control the bee and brood eater ants, right? Because they don't eat honey and nectar. I really like one of the quotes that Bill has in his document about controlling these ants. He says, carnivorous and scavenger ants, like big-headed fire and carpenter ants, prefer proteins and fats and oils, while sugar-loving ants like ghost, white-footed, and Argentine ants readily go to sugar-based baits. So it really helps to have your ant ID. Who is the ant that's attacking your bees? And that will tell you what type of bait to use. In addition to baits to control the ants, there are exclusion techniques where you simply keep the ants away from or out of the hive altogether. And Bill goes into great detail in this EDIS document about how you can set up moats around colonies, or you can put colonies on stands where the legs go down into containers that have soapy water, etc. So, I could describe every ant species and every ant control strategy, but I think it's a great idea to look at EDIS document that Dr. Kern wrote on ants. Audience, if you're listening, you can find that by Googling EDIS. Again, that's EDIS, ant control in apiaries, or you can look at the notes and resources section for today's podcast to find a link to this EDIS document.
Yeah, it sounds like Bill is really better than the Marvel Ant-Man out there.
He's the man, that's for sure. I almost said for shizzle, but that would be really embarrassing, right? He's the Ant-Man for sure.
All right. So the second question we have, so, we actually have a visiting scholar here from Thailand, and he was doing some research, and he is here just working effortlessly. I see him all the time, and he's here on weekends. He's here at night.
I love
always
it.
Here.
People dedicated to advancing science and stamping out ignorance. I love those kinds of students.
So he had a study where, he's looking at nosema and nosema spores and looking at propolis, and then he found that there were some worker bees laying eggs.
Yeah.
Does that happen?
Yeah, of course it happens. Workers are females, right? Now, here's the deal. In a standard colony, a queen honeybee is producing pheromones that cause workers' ovaries to remain undeveloped. Now, workers and queens are both females, but workers have essentially forfeited the right to reproduce. So in a normal functioning colony with a queen present, the bees can determine she's present because they can smell her, and those pheromones will suppress ovary development. But when a colony loses its queen for whatever reason, she dies, she's maimed, etc., if they fail to produce their own queen, some workers' ovaries will develop in the absence of those queen pheromones, and those workers will begin to lay eggs. Now, laying workers cannot mate. Therefore, they can only produce unfertilized eggs. And of course, in the honeybee world, that means those unfertilized eggs will be drones. So a colony that is now headed by laying workers is only capable of producing drones. It will die. Mm-hmm. So you can dissect laying workers and find that their ovaries are starting to develop. You can see the eggs developing in those ovaries, but that's essentially meaningless. So why do laying workers develop in the first place? Well, scientists believe it's the colony's last-ditch attempt to get its genes out before it dies. It's hopelessly queenless. There's nothing one can do to solve that problem, at least in a natural system. There are management techniques you can use to solve that problem, but in a natural system, there's nothing a colony can do to fix that. So basically, the worker bees are just kicking out lots and lots and lots of eggs in an effort to get their DNA out there before the colony cashes in its chips.
That is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is neat. But, it's a struggle because when workers' ovaries develop, they produce queen-like pheromones. So it's hard to solve the problem.
Sure. Because
as you feed queens to that colony, they think they've got a queen and they just kill those queens. So it's a management nightmare, but a biological, just amazing phenomenon.
I heard when you go and just kind of dump them off somewhere.
Yeah, a lot of beekeepers will actually dump laying worker colonies off. The premise is that they think the workers are too heavy to fly, so they'll never make it back to the hive. A much better way to requeen laying worker colonies is to actually use a queen-right nuke that you drop into that laying worker colony, and that queen-right nuke essentially bullies out those laying workers, and their own queen, the queen that accompanied the nuke into the full-size colony, takes over as the reigning matriarch.
Sure. And speaking of queens, this kind of heads us into the third question that I have for you as far as Africanized bees. So we have Africanized bees here?
Yeah, so we do. And African bees are one of those tricky topics. And it's hard for me to talk about them without giving a very brief biogeography history. There's 9 species of honeybees on the planet, right? And one of those occurs naturally in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And that's the bee that we keep. It's Apis mellifera. This one bee has subspecies in Europe, subspecies in the Middle East, and subspecies in Africa. So the African bee, the one you referenced, is one of somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 subspecies of this Apis mellifera.
Should we be scared of having them?
Yeah, so what happened is the European subspecies that were imported into North America were taken into Central and South America. And these temperate race subspecies didn't do a good job at honey production in these tropical, subtropical climates. So a scientist went over from Brazil to South Africa and other countries in Africa to sample bees there and brought back with him one of the subspecies. Now, one of the things that's common among a lot of African subspecies of bees is they're very defensive. So you asked, should we be scared of them? Now, beekeepers should not be scared of them. We can manage them. But we need to be conscious of the fact that these bees can be defensive. They're easily provoked. So they've found their way into Florida. They're in the southwestern United States. They're in southern Florida. So for us and for other parts of the U.S., beekeepers really shouldn't be keeping these bees because they can provide, they can be a problem for their neighbors, for livestock, etc. So I tell people not to be scared. They need to be aware of them, educated about them, and know exactly what this bee is and why it's a problem and why we shouldn't manage. And furthermore, if we get African bees in our colonies or our colonies become Africanized, what we need to do about it.
All right. Well, thank you.
Absolutely a pleasure.
We'd like to give an extra special thank you to the following: to our editors, Shelby Howell and Bailey Carroll, and for our audio engineer, James Weaver. Without their hard work, 2 Bees in a Pod would not be possible. So thanks, guys.
For more information and additional resources from today's episode, don't forget to visit the UF IFAS Honeybee Research and Extension Laboratory's website, ufhoneybee.com. Do you have questions you want answered on air? If so, email them to honeybee@ifas.ufl.edu or message us on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook @UF Honeybee Lab. While there, don't forget to follow us. Thank you for listening to our podcast, 2 Bees in a Pod.